In every great revolution, there are visible flames, the battles, the speeches, the declarations, and then there are the quieter forces, the symbols, the creeds, and the unseen rituals that shaped the minds of the revolutionaries. The American founding was no exception. As we look back on the birth of the United States, we find not just a political uprising, but a symbolic one. In the words carved into stone, the iconography on our seals and currency, and the careful architecture of our capital city, there are messages that go deeper than policy. There are traces of mystery. Why did so many of the founding fathers surround themselves with symbols? Why were secret societies not only accepted, but celebrated? Why, at the very heart of the American experiment, do we find pyramids, eyes in the sky, and Latin phrases about a new order of the ages? The men who shaped this nation were not all alike. Some were devout Christians. Others were deists, skeptics, or seekers of ancient wisdom. But a notable few were drawn to the mystical, to Freemasonry, Hermetic thought, and Enlightenment-era occultism. These weren't fringe ideas in their time. They were part of the intellectual climate, a blend of science, reason, and a desire to uncover eternal truths, whether through mathematics, natural law, or the secrets hidden in symbols and rituals. To understand the full story of the founding, we must go deeper than politics. We must explore the ideas that moved these men, not just their public philosophies, but their private curiosities. The sacred geometries, the societies with closed doors, the belief that symbols could carry power, not just represent it. This is a history not only of rebellion, but of revelation. A search for liberty, yes, but also for order, harmony, and meaning in a chaotic world. This is the unseen side of the founding, where the rational mind meets the mystical impulse, where parchment meets prophecy. And to begin, we must look at the world they lived in, the intellectual soil from which the Republic grew. To understand the metaphysical undercurrents of the American founding, we must first understand the era that shaped it. The 18th century is often called the Age of Enlightenment, a time of reason, progress, and scientific awakening. But that label only tells half the story. Beneath the surface of Enlightenment thinking lay older currents, ancient, mystical traditions that never fully disappeared. Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and Rosicrucianism continued to breathe beneath the new language of logic and natural law. These traditions, often dismissed today as superstition, were anything but fringe in their time. Hermeticism, rooted in ancient Egypt and refined through the Renaissance, taught that the universe was interconnected, that symbols could reflect cosmic truths, and that humanity had the potential to unlock divine knowledge through study and meditation. Neoplatonism added to this a belief in a perfect, transcendent realm, and a deep suspicion that what we see is only a shadow of higher realities. The material world, in this view, is a kind of veil. Then came the Rosicrucians, a secretive, mystical society that blended Christian symbolism with alchemical allegory. They spoke of a hidden brotherhood working silently to uplift humanity through wisdom, virtue, and enlightenment. And surprisingly, this worldview did not vanish in the glare of Enlightenment science. It merged with it. Many Enlightenment thinkers were not enemies of mysticism. They were heirs to it. They believed that reason and revelation could coexist, that the natural world could be studied through the microscope and the metaphor alike. Consider Isaac Newton. We know him for gravity and calculus, but he wrote more on alchemy and biblical prophecy than on physics. To Newton, the laws of nature were divine codes, and alchemy was not a foolish pursuit. It was a key to understanding the divine structure of the universe. Or Francis Bacon, often credited with founding the scientific method. He envisioned a future society governed by knowledge, modeled on the mythical Rosicrucian ideal. Bacon wasn't just a man of reason. He believed in a hidden architecture to the world, waiting to be discovered and decoded. This blending of reason and mysticism profoundly shaped the intellectual world of the Founding Fathers. They read Newton not only as a scientist, but as a prophet of order. They saw Bacon's vision as a blueprint for a new society, a republic of knowledge, virtue, and higher purpose. So when we find esoteric symbols in the founding documents or Masonic influences among the founders, we must remember they lived in a time when science was still soaked in the sacred, when men believed that geometry could reflect divine harmony. That truth was not just discovered through reason, but revealed through symbols, rituals, and moral insight. This is the world that shaped Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, and their peers. A world where the age of reason had not yet divorced itself from the age of alchemy. And as we shall see, that blend would leave its mark on the American experiment, not just in ideas, but in architecture, rituals, and the very symbolism of the Republic itself. If Hermeticism and Rosicrucianism were the intellectual undercurrents of the 18th century, Freemasonry was the organized vessel that carried those ideas into civic life. So what is Freemasonry? At its core, Freemasonry is a fraternal organization with medieval roots, born from the stonemason guilds of Europe. But by the 1700s, it had transformed into something more philosophical than professional, a society devoted to moral development, symbolic ritual, and mutual improvement. It taught that man could become more virtuous through the study of allegory, the practice of ethics, and the pursuit of knowledge. Freemasonry uses the tools of architecture, the square, the compass, the level, as metaphors for building the self. It sees the world as a kind of symbolic temple, and the goal of life as shaping oneself into a master mason of character and virtue. The founding era saw a boom in Masonic lodges. These weren't just social clubs. They were spaces of quiet but potent influence, where men from different walks of life gathered to discuss philosophy, ethics, science, and, increasingly, politics. Among the American founders, Freemasonry found many adherents. George Washington was not just a Mason. He was initiated in 1752 and eventually became a Master Mason. He attended lodge meetings throughout his life and even laid the cornerstone of a U.S. Capitol building in a Masonic ceremony, wearing the traditional apron and sash. Benjamin Franklin was also a committed Freemason. He helped print Masonic texts, participated in international Masonic diplomacy, and saw in the fraternity a model for global brotherhood rooted in virtue and mutual respect. Paul Revere, famed for his midnight ride, was a Grand Master of the Massachusetts Lodge. James Monroe, the fifth president, was a Mason as well. And the list goes on, with many framers and early American leaders either openly involved or deeply sympathetic to the Masonic ethos. So what influence did this have? Consider the architecture of Washington, D.C., the layout of the city, its symbolic obelisks, temples, and alignments, reflects Masonic ideals, symmetry, sacred geometry, and the idea that space can reflect order. Consider the imagery on the Great Seal of the United States. On the reverse, an unfinished pyramid, 13 steps, rising toward an eye of providence, the all-seeing eye. These are not random images. They are drawn from Masonic and esoteric traditions, the pyramid representing strength and endurance, the eye representing divine watchfulness or enlightenment. Even the number 13, repeated throughout early American symbols, carries a deeper resonance. It marks the original colonies, but also echoes traditions of sacred number in Masonic lore. The dollar bill today carries these images still, quiet reminders of a founding moment shaped by more than just legal theory or rebellion. Symbols meant to suggest that this was not merely a nation, but an idea, something enduring, ordered, and rooted in deeper principles. Masonic lodges themselves were places where such ideas could flourish. Unlike the noisy pamphlet wars or the polarized debates of the time, lodges encouraged calm dialogue, mutual respect, and serious philosophical reflection. In this way, they became crucibles for leadership and testing grounds for the republican virtues that the founders hoped to instill in the new nation. This doesn't mean America was founded by Freemasonry or that it was a secret project of hidden hands. But it does mean that the Masonic worldview, its moral code, its symbols, its emphasis on order, reason, and spiritual progress, deeply influenced the men who shaped the Republic. The fingerprints are there, in the rituals of state, in the monuments we walk past, and in the symbols printed on every dollar we spend. The next time you hold one in your hand, you're not just holding currency. You're holding a mirror to a founding vision that blended liberty with mystery and reason with something more eternal. Benjamin Franklin is often remembered as the practical genius of the Revolution, inventor, diplomat, printer, scientist. But behind the bifocals and witty aphorisms was a man drawn deeply to the hidden threads that connected science, spirit, and power. Franklin spent many of his most formative years not in America, but in Europe, moving through the salons of Paris and the secretive clubs of London. There, he encountered the strange overlap between Enlightenment rationalism and underground mysticism. In many ways, he became a bridge, not just between nations, but between worlds. One of the most mysterious aspects of Franklin's life is his rumored association with the Hellfire Club, a notorious English society known for its libertine rituals and irreverent takes on religion and morality. The club was founded by Sir Francis Dashwood, a statesman and known occult dabbler, whose motto was Fais ce que voudras, do what thou wilt. Franklin's documented friendship with Dashwood is not in question. They corresponded often, and Franklin visited Dashwood's estate, West Wickham, where the Hellfire Club held some of its secretive meetings in caves adorned with classical and esoteric symbols. While there's no definitive proof that Franklin participated in the club's rites, his association with its founder raises enduring questions about the breadth of his interests and the company he kept. But Franklin's esoteric curiosity was not limited to shadowy clubs. His scientific work, particularly his experiments with electricity, was rooted in something more than technical fascination. For Franklin, electricity wasn't just a phenomenon, it was a cosmic force, a visible thread in the invisible fabric of nature. He believed that unlocking its mysteries could help explain the very workings of divine order. He saw lightning as the signature of a vast and orderly cosmos. When he flew his famous kite into a storm, he wasn't just testing a hypothesis, he was confronting the heavens, seeking communion, not just data. His invention of the lightning rod, which protected buildings from fire, was seen by some clergy as interfering with divine judgment. But Franklin saw it as aligning human understanding with nature's laws, a sacred act in itself. This blending of science and spiritual inquiry is sometimes called rational mysticism, the belief that reason and revelation are not enemies, but partners. Franklin embraced this view. He admired religious toleration, but distrusted dogma. He respected Christianity, but read widely in deism, Hermetic philosophy, and classical pagan thought. He believed in a creator, a kind of cosmic architect, but rejected the narrowness of sectarian theology. In one of his later writings, Franklin described God as infinite wisdom and self-existing, a being whose laws could be discovered not by scripture alone, but by the careful study of nature and the application of reason. Franklin also belonged to multiple learned societies, including the Royal Society of London and the Club of Honest Whigs, groups where Enlightenment ideas flowed freely, including those on alchemy, ancient religions, and the philosophy of natural law. These weren't occult orders per se, but they blurred the line between science, metaphysics, and speculative belief. Even in his diplomacy, Franklin's mystique served him well. In France, he cultivated an almost druidic image, wearing a fur hat, playing the part of the noble American sage. It wasn't just theater, it was symbolic power. He understood myth, appearance, and symbolism, and used them to shape perception, both of himself and the cause he represented. Franklin was no occultist in the traditional sense. He didn't conjure spirits or draft grimoires, but he lived at the crossroads of reason and wonder. He explored the edges of knowledge, not to dominate nature, but to understand the sublime intelligence behind it. To know Franklin is to know a man unafraid of mystery, a man who could spark revolutions with his pen and see the divine in a bolt of lightning. Jefferson's rejection of organized religion was not rooted in hatred of faith, but in his desire for clarity. He wrote that the teachings of Jesus had been obscured by so much uncharitableness, bigotry, and absurdity. And so, in a quiet act of spiritual revolution, Jefferson set out to uncover what he called the most sublime and benevolent code of morals which has ever been offered to man. He took a razor and a Bible and created what is now known as the Jefferson Bible, cutting away every miracle, prophecy, and supernatural claim. No virgin birth, no resurrection, no walking on water. What remained were the words, the parables, the ethics, the teachings. A gospel of reason, trimmed of mystery. But Jefferson was no mere skeptic. He believed in a creator, a divine intelligence behind the order of the universe. He was a deist in the classical Enlightenment sense, believing that God created the world, set its laws in motion, and allowed reason to be the compass for human life. In Jefferson's vision, the divine was not found in ritual or revelation, but in nature, in conscience, and in the quiet pursuit of wisdom. His private letters reveal a deep fascination with comparative religion, including not just Christianity and deism, but the ancient mystery religions of Egypt, Persia, and Greece. He studied Mithraism and Zoroastrianism. He showed interest in the ideas of reincarnation, sacred geometry, and even the ethical teachings of Buddhism. Though not a practitioner, he believed that all religions carried fragments of moral truth, and that the wise man sought understanding, not superiority. There are also hints that Jefferson may have held sympathy for Freemasonry. Though he was not a confirmed Mason, he wrote favorably of the fraternity and shared its values: liberty, equality, fraternity, and the search for light. His use of architecture, especially at Monticello and the University of Virginia, reflects classical Masonic themes: symmetry, sacred proportions, and symbols drawn from antiquity. Jefferson's design for the university was not just educational, it was philosophical. The rotunda, modeled after the Roman Pantheon, was a temple of reason. The layout of the lawn, the pavilions, and the gardens reflected harmony with nature and order. Even in bricks and marble, Jefferson was expressing his belief in the moral geometry of the universe. What made Jefferson different was his conviction that the truth could be known, not through revelation, but through reflection. He once wrote, "Fix reason firmly in her seat, and call to her tribunal every fact, every opinion." That was his creed. In an age of superstition and tyranny, Jefferson stood for inquiry. In a world of unquestioned dogma, he asked uncomfortable questions. His personal theology may not have comforted many, but it reflected a mind unwilling to accept the easy answer. He sought a religion of virtue, a politics of principle, and a life aligned with the quiet laws of nature. In that search, Jefferson was not alone, but he was uncompromising. At first glance, the city of Washington, D.C. appears like any other European-inspired capital: domes, columns, boulevards. But look closer, and patterns emerge. Symbols appear. Alignments provoke questions. Beneath the marble and granite lies a story, one shaped not just by politics, but by symbolism, geometry, and intention. The layout of the city itself has long been the subject of speculation. Pierre-Charles L'Enfant's original design for the Capitol bears traces of both Enlightenment rationalism and esoteric tradition. The city was arranged on a grid, with diagonal avenues cutting across like the rays of a compass. Many researchers have noted the use of sacred geometry, triangles, pentagrams, and alignments that mirror celestial events. Whether intentional or coincidental, the city became fertile ground for theories about Masonic influence. Take the Capitol building, for example. Its massive dome rises not just as a symbol of democracy, but also as a visual echo of the Pantheon, a temple to all gods. At its base is a crypt. At its top, the apotheosis of Washington, a painting showing the first president ascending to heaven surrounded by classical deities. The symbolism is unmistakable: transformation, divinity, ascension. a mortal becoming more. Then there's the Washington Monument, an obelisk in the heart of the National Mall. It mimics the ancient Egyptian form, long associated with solar worship and resurrection. In esoteric traditions, the obelisk is a phallic symbol of power, energy, and the bridge between heaven and earth. Why choose that form, towering over the capital of a republic? What message was being sent? Some have argued the entire National Mall functions as a kind of symbolic corridor, from the Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument to the White House, a ritual landscape echoing ancient temples and sacred sites. The alignment of monuments and buildings seems to mirror solar events and zodiac patterns. Skeptics call it coincidence. Others see the deliberate hand of initiates embedding deeper meaning into the fabric of the republic. Perhaps the most enduring occult symbol tied to the American founding is the Great Seal. On its reverse side, famously printed on the dollar bill, we see the unfinished pyramid and the all-seeing eye. The Latin phrases annuit coeptis and novis ordo seclorum suggest divine favor and the birth of a new age. These are not standard governmental motifs. They are Hermetic, echoing alchemical rebirth and transformation. The pyramid, 13-stepped, represents strength and longevity. The eye above it, encased in radiance, can be traced to Egyptian, Christian, and Masonic iconography. In esoteric systems, it symbolizes divine watchfulness, illumination, and inner awakening. To some, it suggests that America was to be more than a country. It was to be a new philosophical temple. This ties directly to the writings of Francis Bacon, whose vision of the New Atlantis imagined a society governed by science, wisdom, and moral order. Bacon's influence on Enlightenment thinkers, including some founders, can't be ignored. He envisioned a sacred scientific republic, a hidden land where knowledge would be preserved, cultivated, and used to elevate humanity. For many in the 18th century, the New World was that land. Was America, then, not just a political experiment, but a metaphysical one? A country built on liberty, yes, but also on archetypes, allegory, and the dream of a perfected man in a perfected society? The evidence is not always definitive, but the symbolism is there, carved in stone, printed on currency, and aligned with stars. Whether placed by conscious intent or subconscious resonance, these images continue to provoke. They raise a haunting possibility that the American experiment was never just political, but deeply spiritual, even mystical. Not every founding father was drawn to secret orders, esoteric symbols, or Enlightenment mysticism. While figures like Franklin, Jefferson, and Washington flirted with or embraced aspects of Freemasonry or deism, others remained firmly anchored in traditional Christian beliefs and deeply suspicious of hidden agendas. Samuel Adams was one such voice. A devout Congregationalist, Adams saw liberty not as a product of Enlightenment philosophy, but as a divine gift protected by moral virtue and biblical principles. For him, the revolution was not about building a new Atlantis or crafting symbolic architecture. It was about restoring God-given rights under natural law. Adams viewed human nature as fallen, institutions as corruptible, and secretive societies with skepticism, if not outright alarm. Patrick Henry as well stood apart. Famed for his cry of, "Give me liberty or give me death," Henry was no deist. He was a passionate Christian, vocal in his opposition to what he saw as rising secularism among some of his fellow founders. When the Constitution was drafted, Henry refused to attend the convention, wary of centralized power and suspicious of the philosophical direction it was taking. He feared that the new federal government, lacking an explicit Christian foundation, might drift toward tyranny masked by reason. These men weren't opposed to liberty or reason, far from it, but they represented a strong current of thought in early America that true freedom must be grounded in God, not man. That moral law, not symbolism, holds a nation together. They worried that the blending of mysticism, secrecy, and rationalism could open the door to ambition unmoored from conscience. There were also many clergy and laypeople during the founding era who warned of the influence of Freemasonry. Pamphlets circulated in churches denouncing secret oaths, exclusive lodges, and the perceived moral relativism of the Enlightenment. Even within Masonic ranks, not all lodges were alike. Some were devoutly Christian. Others leaned more philosophical or esoteric. Tensions simmered. This push and pull between mystical idealism and Christian orthodoxy, between hidden knowledge and revealed truth, defined much of the ideological undercurrent of the American founding. It wasn't a simple story of occult America or Christian America. It was a struggle, a conversation, a balancing act, and that tension never fully resolved. The symbolic language of Freemasonry made its mark on American institutions, but so did the sermons of revivalist preachers. The Capitol may bear classical imagery, but its sessions still open with prayer. The currency may show the all-seeing eye, but it also reads "In God We Trust." Understanding the founding means acknowledging both sides, the mystical and the moral, the secretive and the sacred. America was born not just from revolution, but from paradox. And within that paradox lies the enduring tension of a nation still searching for its soul. As America moved into the 20th and 21st centuries, the whispers of the Founding Fathers' occult connections didn't fade, they grew louder. But often they grew distorted. What began as historical curiosities, symbols on currency, obelisks in the Capitol, Masonic handshakes, became, in some circles, evidence of vast conspiracies. Anti-Masonic movements emerged in the 1800s, but in the modern era, conspiracy theorists layered these suspicions with fears of shadow governments, new world orders, and satanic influence. Entire books, documentaries, and online forums have been devoted to uncovering supposed hidden truths buried beneath the American experiment. Occultists, too, reimagine the founders in their own image. Some claim the Founding Fathers were secret adepts of Hermetic wisdom, using the revolution as a ritual to usher in a new aeon. Others saw the architecture of Washington, D.C., not as symbolic homage, but as an active magical grid, a talisman designed to shape destiny. But what does the historical record actually show? Yes, many of the founders were Freemasons. Yes, they employed classical and esoteric symbols. But Freemasonry, in its historical context, was not a sinister cabal. It was a social, philosophical, and moral fraternity, influenced by Enlightenment ideals and ancient allegory. Its symbols, the compass, the eye, the pyramid, were meant to inspire reflection, not control. Likewise, figures like Franklin and Jefferson were products of their age, curious, skeptical, drawn to ideas that challenged tradition. But they were not occultists in the modern sense. Their interest in science, deism, or classical mysticism was about inquiry, not domination. Still, the imagery they helped shape, the Great Seal, the Capitol, the obelisk, the mottos, holds a strange power. It invites interpretation. It stirs imagination. And in a nation built on revolutionary ideas and a touch of myth-making, that may be no accident. Even today, we see the persistence of this symbolic language. Politicians speak of a shining city on a hill. New generations re-examine old architecture. Cultural movements revisit the Masonic legacy. Whether through reverence or suspicion, the symbols of the founding era continue to resonate. But perhaps the real lesson lies not in secret meanings, but in public choices. The founders were complex men, shaped by the cross-currents of reason and mystery, faith and philosophy. They used symbols, but symbols alone didn't build the republic. Ideas did. Principles did. Action did. In the end, separating myth from history doesn't diminish the story, it deepens it. It reminds us that America was not conjured into being by ritual, but forged through struggle, dialogue, and vision. The legacy of the founders, mystical or not, is still being written, not in lodges or vaults, but in classrooms, communities, and conversations. And maybe that's the real secret, that the power wasn't hidden. It was always meant to be shared. The founding of America was not a simple story of politics and war. It was also a story of symbols, ideas, and deeper questions. The founding fathers lived at a crossroads between the rational and the mystical, the seen and the unseen. They were children of the Enlightenment, yes, but many were also students of ancient wisdom. They believed in liberty, but they also believed in the power of ideas, symbols, and unseen forces to shape human destiny. The architecture of the Capitol, the phrases etched into stone, the emblems on our currency, these are more than decoration. They are invitations. They ask each generation to look deeper, to question, to imagine. Mysticism didn't replace reason. It complemented it. The founders weren't building a secret society. They were building a nation. But in doing so, they reached into the past, to classical philosophy, biblical metaphor, and esoteric tradition, to give meaning to what they created. That's the paradox at the heart of the American experiment. It is at once grounded in law and lifted by ideals, built on contracts and constitutions, yet shaped by imagination and myth. It is the product of meetings and arguments, but also dreams. Perhaps that's why the symbols still speak, because they remind us that liberty is more than a structure of rights. It is a spirit, a sacred flame, something fragile, mysterious, and worth guarding. The all-seeing eye is not just a Masonic image. The pyramid is not just a design. They are signs, reminders that what was built here was meant to endure, but only if we remember why. In the end, the founders left us more than a government. They left a story, layered with meaning, open to interpretation, alive with possibility. And that may be their most powerful legacy of all.